medical marijuana has been legal since 1998, legal to grow, but there hasn't been the ability to have a medical marijuana dispensary until actually May 1st in Jackson County, May 1st of this year, 2015. And so the county instituted some regulations around medical marijuana dispensaries, distance from each other, distance from medical marijuana dispensaries, distance from schools, which is in the statute, distance from parks and other residential areas, and then distance from the VA source, or what I think most people down here commonly refer to as the VA domiciliary. And that is no medical marijuana dispensary can be within a mile of the VA. So we did that, and that's actually in place. It went into effect on July 27th, and we have 4 medical marijuana dispensary applications that are currently going through the land use process. What happened for July 1st was that personal marijuana became legal. So having 4 plants, or and on the medical side, that was already legal. Having a card, you can have 6 plants. But for recreational, you can have those 4 plants, or that certain number of ounces, a certain number of edibles. That became legal, and the county thus far hasn't regulated that personal, the ability to have that kind of personal marijuana, personal recreational marijuana. What I anticipate coming, though, is as of January 1st, 2016, the county can regulate place, time, and manner for growing or producing, as they call it, processing, wholesaling, and selling recreational marijuana as well as medical marijuana. So what I foresee coming down the pike is that the county will begin a process, and actually will begin it rather shortly, of going through and looking at regulating from a land use perspective, because that's all I do, land use. From a land use perspective, growing, processing, and selling marijuana. Right now, because recreational isn't regulated, and medical marijuana will become more regulated after the 1st of January of 2016, I think we're seeing lots of people increase their production. And we're seeing lots of people who are from out of the area come to our area to grow. I think I've heard the term green rush, like the gold rush. And because of that, I think we're seeing more issues pop up, more neighbor conflicts. We're seeing people who don't really understand our sort of environmental regulations coming here, and because they don't understand it, they're doing things that I think they think is okay, and it turns out not to be okay, like clearing the riparian area down to the creek. So we have a 50-foot riparian buffer, pretty standard throughout the state of Oregon, 50 foot for normal streams, and then 75 feet for the rogue. And we're seeing people clearing land to be able to grow marijuana. We're seeing people, in environmentally sensitive areas like the Vernal Pool Agate Desert area out in White City, grading those areas and not really realizing that they are environmentally sensitive. And so I think, we're seeing more of that. I think some of that is going to calm down when the regulation actually starts and the Oregon Liquor Control Commission and the Oregon Health Authority have to permit, or are required to permit, growers and processors. I think some of that is going to go away. And I think that the increase in production is probably going to be tampered a little bit because of the Oregon Liquor Control Commission's and OHA's regulations. Some of the issues that we're hearing about are, of course, smell. And we've been hearing about those issues for a while, but because I think production has ramped up, those issues are more prevalent. And issues of light pollution, which we hadn't really contemplated before. People who are growing in greenhouses, for example, and having lights on at night. So, neighbors who were just living out, and when it got dark, they could see the stars, and they didn't really experience any smell of any other crops that were being grown around them. That has changed for some people, and they view that as a negative. And those are different issues or different impacts than we see, for growing a pear, for example, or growing a tomato, where those crops aren't worth as much, so there's not as much, protection. We've had complaints about people, camping on their land with guns and, large kind of vicious dogs. And those kinds of things you typically don't see when people are growing pears or people are growing wine, grapes. But like I said, I think as regulation comes in 2016, I think you're probably going to see a little bit less of that. And I think the county can do some things to look at regulating those impacts from a land use perspective. In terms of local regulation, the state has actually given local jurisdictions, cities and counties, the ability to regulate place, time, and manner. So one of the things, I've mentioned impacts. There are impacts about smell, light pollution, other things. And ways to mitigate those impacts might be setbacks from property lines or setbacks from neighboring homes for marijuana grows. It may be that the lights in your greenhouse have to go off at 10 o'clock at night or something like that. So there are a myriad of ways, I think, that the county can use regulation to sort of mitigate those negative impacts that people are seeing right now. And we'll see how that goes as we go into that land use process. Well, I think where it goes from here is twofold. The Oregon Liquor Control Commission and the Oregon Health Authority, so that's those state agencies that regulate from the big picture medical marijuana and recreational marijuana, will continue to, they're going through rulemaking processes to kind of create some rules on how and where marijuana will be grown. Not only just grown, but tested, and how it will, in terms of packaging, those kinds of things. They're all looking at those things. And looking at the models in Colorado and looking at the models in Washington as kind of guides, but Oregon wants to do it. There's been some experience now with Oregon, with Colorado and Washington, and I think Oregon has learned from that. And they'll continue creating regulation, and the legislature will continue creating regulation. Where we are locally is that we have the opportunity now to start creating our local regulation. And so where we go from now is we'll start doing that. And so that will go through, staff will craft some model or draft ordinances, and then that'll go to the Planning Commission, and there'll be public hearings. So, if people are interested, and I hope they are, they can come to the Jackson County Planning Commission meetings and voice their thoughts, concerns, or ideas about our ordinance. And then the Planning Commission will make a recommendation to our Board of Commissioners, and they'll hold public hearings as well. And hopefully people attend those to provide that public input to help shape these ordinances and shape the environment and what they want to see how this new industry, if you will, this new agricultural enterprise can, I think, coexist successfully and harmoniously with the surrounding neighborhood. The Development Services Department does planning and building and code enforcement, and I actually think that we will see more activity. Growing recreational marijuana is going to be considered a farm use in Oregon, meaning on exclusive farm use land, you can farm it. It would be treated like any other crop, like a tomato or a pear. However, on lands that aren't zoned exclusive farm use, I think the county has the ability to regulate those lands. And there may be some lands where it's inappropriate for it to be grown, frankly. Maybe it is inappropriate for it to be grown on industrial land. Interestingly enough, it could be possibly grown on industrial land. And is that a good use of our industrial land? I can see processing marijuana, which I think there's going to be a large industry for that, processing extracts, creating edibles, doing those things. And I think those may be more appropriate uses in our industrial zone. Is it appropriate for it to be grown on rural residential zoned property, which are usually properties that are smaller, 2.5 acres, 5 acres? Because when you have a lot of 2.5 and 5 acre properties, they're close together. And, so those impacts can be greater. So those are all kind of the things that I think the Planning Commission and the board will wrestle with when they look to regulate. And it, again, from a land use perspective, it's all about trying to balance those impacts. We know there are going to be impacts, but how can we do things from a regulatory perspective to sort of mitigate those? And that's what we're going to be working on at the local level. And I think all counties and cities are going to be starting to work on those same things as we get closer to January 1st, 2016.